كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. So alhamdulillah, today what we'll be doing, we'll be going through the next part of the poem. And this is a large chunk of the poem that Ibn Abidin mentions here that we'll be going through all together, in which Ibn Abidin mentions 9 principles, 9 rules of preponderance. So what are these rules of preponderance? We'll go through each and every one of them. He lists 9 of them in the poem. We'll go through the poem very briefly, and then after the poem, we'll discuss each one in a bit more detail. Some of them, I will try to give examples for, where they're brief examples so we can understand and appreciate what that is. But some of them will require a lot more detail to try to explain. So I don't think this is the place to try to explain those, because that's going into other topics of fiqh and things. So I think we'll leave the explanation on them, because the purpose is simply to understand the actual rule. I will make sure, inshallah, I will explain the rule properly. The rule will be understood. It's just that giving a practical example of it will require a lot more detail than just a few brief minutes of a recording of a video. So for that, we're going to leave that till another time, inshallah. But for now, at least, we can understand. If there is time later on in the other lessons here and there, I'll try to give a few examples. But otherwise, I don't think we'll get time to finish all the usulul ifta otherwise, if we start to go into an example for each and every one of them. So nevertheless, there are obviously examples for each one, each principle, each rule that there is for giving preference. But some of them will try to give the examples where there's brief example for, and the other ones will keep it a little brief, inshallah. And we'll make sure that the rule itself is understood. And then lastly, because Ibn Abidin discusses the mutun, we'll go through certain mutun, the names of these mutun, who the authors of these mutun are, the mutun, the primers that are relied upon, what they are, inshallah, we'll try to give you them. Your job will simply to be putting it in order, because I'll just tell you the way that the author has mentioned it, in the order he's mentioned it in. Then you can just switch the order about, see which one he's mentioned as the earliest primers, and then you can see them in that order. And this will give you some benefit in terms of working out who wrote what, and the books that were relied upon to then be taught. Some of them are taught, and some of them obviously have become just a primer for which sharh is done. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. So now we move on to the next part of Ibn Abidin's poem. Here now we have the Ibn Abidin mentions in this large chunk of the poem, which we're going to do all together, he mentions 9 rules, you can say 9 rules of preponderance. So how do we preponderate masail, rulings? So this is the 9 of them that he mentions in this particular part of the poem, which we'll do together now. So he says, وَهُنَاكَ ضَوَابِطُ مُحَرَّرَةٌ غَدَتْ لَدَى أُولِي النُّهَى مُقَرَّرَةٌ. So here there are rules that have been written, have been authored, which have become, and according to the people of intellect, have become affirmed, have become fixed. Number 1, the first one. في كل أبواب الإبادات رجح قول الإمام مطلقا ما لم تصح عنه رواية بها الغير أخذ مثل تيمم لمن تمر نبذ. So in all the chapters of ibadat, so when it comes to the chapters of tahara, salat, zakat, Sawm and Hajj, in all the ibadat chapters, tarjih, meaning preponderance, will be given to the statement to the opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi unconditionally, without any condition, as long as a opinion of other than him hasn't been preponderated, hasn't been verified, then that other opinion will obviously be taken. For example, in the chapter of tayammum, for a person who has nabidh tamar, a person who has this nabidh, which is the water which dates have been soaked into. So this date water, is it allowed to be used for when there is nothing else? Meaning, do you do tayammum now and assume that this is not water, or do you use this, in essence, date water, and consider it to be normal water? So Imam Abu Hanifa had the opinion that yes, you use this water. That was an opinion. However, the fatwa is not given on Imam Saab's opinion, is given on Imam Abu Yusuf's opinion, that you would not use this. This is not water. This is now, in essence, like a juice. So this is not considered water anymore. You would have to do tayammum here. So that's what he means here, that, for example, doing tayammum for the one who has soaked some dates into water. It says, "Wakul." Next part. So that's the first rule that we've discussed of how to preponderate. That generally, if it's a matter of ibadah, worship, any ruling that's in the chapters of worship, we give preponderance to Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion by default, unless there is a clear preponderance otherwise. So that's the first one. Then it says, وَكُلُّ فَرْءٍ بِالْقَضَى تَعَلَّقَ قَوْلُ أَبِي يُوسُف فِيهِ يُنْتَقَى. That every ruling, every offshoot ruling in the chapter of judgeship, ruling qada, which is connected to the rulings of qada, sorry, excuse me, the opinion of Imam Abu Yusuf in it will be chosen. So that's the second thing we learn, that how to preponderate, that when it comes to anything to do with qada, it will generally be the opinion of Imam Yusuf that will preponderate. Number 3, the third one, وفي مسائل ذوي الأرحام قد أفتوا بما يقوله محمد. And in the rulings of the ذوي الأرحام, the inheritance of the ذوي الأرحام means the people of kinship that are beyond the asabat, meaning those who are the male relatives related through males. So it's beyond them now. They all ذوي الأرحام, the people who have relationship of womb tie. So in regards to the ذوي الأرحام inheritance, they have given fatwa, the fuqaha, meaning have given fatwa of that which Imam Muhammad says. So in ذوي الأرحام ruling of inheritance, Imam Muhammad's fatwa has been taken. Then number 4 is وَرَجَّحُوا إِسْتِحْسَانَهُمْ عَلَى الْقِيَاسِ إِلَّا مَسَائِلَ وَمَا فِيهَا الْتِبَاسِ. And the fuqaha have given preference, they have given preponderance to their istihsan over qiyas. So in essence, istihsan is preferred over qiyas. So the juristic preference is given preponderance to over the simple analogy. Illa, and except in certain masail in which there is a cross or confusion, meaning there qiyas has been given preference to over istihsan. All of these will be then expounded upon little, slowly up by Ibn Abidin after the poem. So we're just understanding what they are. So number 4 was istihsan over qiyas. Number 5, وظاهر المروي ليس يعدل عنه إلى خلافه إذا ينقل. So the ظاهر المروي means the manifest transmission. It will not be turned away from to another opposing opinion when the ظاهر المروي, ظاهر الرواية has been transmitted. Number 6, لا ينبغي العدول عن دراية إذا أتى بوفقه رواية. So it won't be turned away from diraya, means evidence, when accordance to it is a riwayah, means a transmission. So you have a transmission, an opinion, you're not going to turn away from that opinion which has evidence then. Obviously every ruling will have an opinion, but if a particular book is mentioning an opinion and mentioning evidence for that opinion, that then becomes preponderated because the evidence has been mentioned for that opinion, and it has not been mentioned for other opinions, for example. Then number 7, وَكُلُّ قَوْلٍ جَاءَ يَنْفِي الْكُفْرَ عَنْ مُسْلِمٍ وَلَوْ ضَعِيفًا أَحْرَى. And every opinion which comes about negating disbelief from a Muslim, even if it be a weak opinion, is more preferred. So to deny to avert the kufr from a Muslim would be the best thing to do. So that's why we go with that, even if it's a weak opinion, to keep that person within the fold of Islam. So that was number 7. Number 8 now, وَكُلُّ مَا رَجَعَ عَنْهُ الْمُجْتَهِدُ صَارَ كَمَنْسُوخٍ فَغَيْرُهُ اعْتُمِدَ. So every opinion which the mujtahid turned away from, which the mujtahid retracted from, it becomes like it's mansukh, it's abrogated now. So other than it will be then relied upon. Next, that's number 8. Number 8 was simply you have to go with the rajih mu'tamad opinion, not the mansukh now. If that is meaning the marju' anhu opinion, the retracted from opinion. So that opinion will no longer be allowed to go with. That was number 8. And the last one, number 9, he says, وَكُلُّ قَوْلٍ فِي الْمُتُونِ أَثْبَتَ فَذَاكَ تَرْجِيهٌ لَهُ ضِمْنًا أَتَى. Every opinion in the matan, in the primer, which is established, that would be then preponderance for it in an implicit way, implicit tarjih that has come about. So implicit tarjih is, or implicit preponderance, should I say, is the one that has been mentioned in the primer, the matan. فَرُجِّحَتْ عَلَى الشُّرُوحِ وَالشُّرُوحُ عَلَى الْفَتَاوَى الْقُدْمِ من ذات رجوح ما لم يكن سواه لفظا صححا فالأرجح الذي به قد صرحا. So it will be given preference to the matan will in essence be given preference to over the shuruh, over what is mentioned in the sharh. So what's mentioned in the matan will be first preferred over what's in the sharh, and what's in the sharh, what's in the commentary, will be preferred over that which is in the fatawa. So this is important to understand in terms of strength of evidence, strength of qawl, strength of opinion. The matan is the strongest, then that which is in the sharh, then that which is in the fatawa. So this is how it works. The fatawa, which have which have preceded the fatawa of those who have come before the scholars, from the ones who have the ability to give tarjih, the scholars who have the ability to give preponderance over other opinions. So as long as, though, what's important is that besides it is not clearly preponderated. So if anything besides that matan that has been clearly preponderated, so there's something in the matan, and then there's something opposing that mentioned in the sharh. Now, generally speaking, the matan will get preference because they're both just opinions. But if the one in the sharh has been preponderated, so it's been mentioned clearly that this is the preponderant opinion, this is the asah, this is the sahih, this is the correct opinion, then now the sharh, the opinion that's mentioned there, will get preference to over the matan, right? Because the matan doesn't have any preponderance on it, it's just mentioned. So as long as there is no clear wording preponderating, and then the most preponderant will be that which is clearly mentioned as preponderated. So there's the implicit preponderance. The implicit preponderance is the one that is mentioned in the matan, but obviously explicit preponderance will overpower the implicit one. So this is something to bear in mind. And the reason why the fatawa are last in terms of strength is because that fatwa could be based on this particular scenario, this particular case that was in front of that mufti. So then you can't apply that everywhere, blanket rule. The general rule will be the rulings that are mentioned in the fiqh books, not the fatwa. The fatwa is very specific sometimes to a specific scenario, to a specific case. So that's why that will have least strength in terms of evidence. But if you have nothing else, that's the only thing you have, then obviously that's something that will give you guidance as to which direction to go. So that's why this ordering has been chosen in terms of strength. So hopefully this is clear now in terms of the poem. Now, Ibn Abdin goes on to expound upon each one. So the first one that we prayed, the first rule that we prayed of preponderating is the fatwa in ibadat is, in the chapter of worship, is upon Imam Saab's opinion. So he mentions this from Sharh al-Munya, from Ibrahim al-Halabi, his 956 death date. So he mentions this, that in the chapter of ibadat, this is why we have chosen the opinion of Imam Saab, generally speaking, and as long as there isn't a riwayah, which a transmission which has been clearly preponderated against it. He gives an example like in the purity of the used water. So when a person is attaining ritual purity, doing wudu, for example, and the water that's falling off the limbs, that becomes musta'mal, we know that becomes used. Now that used water, there are different opinions mentioned, even attributed to Imam Sahib regarding this, that whether it's impure, whether it's pure, whether it's just pure but not purifying, all of these rulings, different rulings have been mentioned. So the preponderant opinion there would be the opinion of Imam Sahib, which is mentioning it to be tahir, but غير mutahhir, meaning not a purifier, but it's pure. So that's that. And then likewise he says tayammum faqat inda adami غير nabidh التمر, meaning only doing tayammum at a time of not having anything besides nabidh التمر, meaning that we talked about this already in a poem. If the person only had the date juice, the date, what do you call it, the water, date water was the only thing there, then a person will only do tayammum and not do both, like Imam Muhammad mentions from Imam Sahib. So that's the opinion he's saying we don't go with. We go with the opinion of Imam Yusuf rahmatullah alayhi, that he mentions it from Imam Sahib. So that's that. Then the next one he says is that the fatwa in qadha, that's the second one now, yes? That fatwa when it comes to the chapter of judgeship, ruling as a judge, is that which is Imam Abu Yusuf's qawl, Imam Yusuf's opinion. And he mentions this again from Bahr, from Qunya, he mentions this, that the fatwa in this chapter will be in accordance to Imam Yusuf's opinion, لِزِيَادَةِ التَّجْرِبَةِ, because of his increased what do you call it, experience, that he had more experience than other people in this field. He was judged for the longest period of time, though others were judges as well, like Imam Muhammad was a judge, but Imam Abu Yusuf was judged for the longest period of time. So therefore, because of his experience, he knows better this particular area, this particular field. So therefore, his opinion will get preference. So he mentions this. That's that. And then moving on, where so moving on, he says that the fatwa will then be in Dhawil Arham. When it comes to the Dhawil Arham fatwa, like I said, to mention that when it comes to the inheritance of the Dhawil Arham, fatwa will be given on Imam Muhammad's opinion. So he mentions this from a kitab, Sakbul Anhar ala Fara'idi Multak al-Abhur. So from the chapter of Fara'id of Multak al-Abhur, there was this book written by Tarabulusi, Alauddin al-Tarabulusi. His death date is 1032, and he mentions this, that in all of the inheritance of the Dhawil Arham, we will take the opinion of Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi alayhi from Imam Sahib rahmatullahi alayhi. Fatwa will be given on that opinion. And he quotes this from Sirajuddin in Sharh Fara'idihi, in the Sharh Fara'idihi. Likewise from the Kafi, which we've talked about previously, he says that the Imam Muhammad's qawl out of the two opinions that he mentions from Imam Abu Hanifa is the one that will be given fatwa on. So this is Imam Muhammad's opinion in Dhawil Arham. That's number 3. Number 4, he mentions that preponderance will be given to the istihsan, what we call the juristic preference, or juristic discretion, if you want to say, over the qiyas, the simple analogy. So in essence, if we were to simplify this, a qiyas khafi, which the istihsan generally would be the qiyas khafi over the qiyas jali, okay, over the apparent qiyas. So that is, he mentions this up from the Kitabul Ajnas of Natifi. Natifi is 446, and he also says that this is mentioned by Ibn Nujaym in his Sharh of the Manar. And he says that Najmuddin al-Nasafi, who's 537 death date, he lists some 22 rulings in which in which the opposite way round, that sometimes in certain masail the qiyas is given preference to over the istihsan. So he does mention this, he tries to list some of these, but then obviously as people go along, they keep adding to this list of where qiyas has been given preference to over istihsan. So the conclusion of this is, mentioned by many afterwards, is that this is not something which can be, encompassed, that this is the only rulings in which qiyas is given preference to over istihsan, because this will carry on changing here and there, right? So it will depend on certain rulings that if these criteria is found, then we will give preference to qiyas over istihsan. Now, because this is a very deep topic, it goes into a lot of usul al-fiqh. This is something that you would study in the qiyas chapter of usul al-fiqh. So you pray the kitabullah, the sunnah, the ijma', and then the qiyas. And under the qiyas, you will pray this. Is a much more detailed discussion. So it's not practical for us to go through it right now. Plus, it doesn't really cover our usul al-ifta. All we have to understand from an usul al-ifta perspective is that generally istihsan is given preference to over qiyas. There are only certain rulings in which this is overturned. So that's the main thing to remember over here. Then he mentions the next one is that Zahirul Riwaya, the manifest transmission, is given preference to over the non-Zahirul Riwaya, the non-manifest transmission. So for example, he says that that's number 5 we're talking about here, yes? So in the chapter of Qadha in Bahr, he mentions that whatever is against the Zahirul Riwaya, anything that is contrary to the manifest transmission, that will then be rejected. That will be something that we will turn away from. So if there are 2 opinions of a mujtahid mentioned, one is in the Zahirul Riwaya, in the manifest transmission, and the other one is not in a manifest transmission, is in the Ghayr Zahir Riwaya, like for example, it might be in the Nawadir or somewhere, then we will take the Zahir Riwaya over what's mentioned in the Nadir Riwaya, over what's mentioned in the rare transmission. Unless, like we say, the later scholars have given fatwa clearly on the other opinion, then we can go with the other opinion. So this is the next way, the number 5 of what he's explained of preponderating. Number 6, he says that we won't go away, we won't turn away from the diraya, from that which is the in essence the dalail, the evidence, especially when there is a riwaya, meaning a transmission in accordance to this. So he gives here that from Sharhul Munya, he says, under the discussion of Ta'dilul Arkan, meaning under the discussion of keeping each limb in Salah, keeping it still, having each limb still, or settling in that posture where the limbs have become still in that posture, in the prayer. So when we are praying, this is called Ta'dilul Arkan, meaning the limbs becoming still in that position. So in becoming settled in that posture. So under that, he says that there are different transmissions from Imam Abu Hanifa regarding this. Some saying that the Ta'dilul Arkan is Sunnah, whilst the others say it's Wajib. So he says that likewise the same thing regarding the Qawma and Jalsa, meaning the standing between Ruku and Sujood. So when you get up from Ruku, that's the Qawma before you go into Sajda. Likewise, Jalsa, between the two Sajdas, there is a sitting, that's the Jalsa. So there's opinions mentioned regarding this. But then he concludes by saying that when you know that the demand of the evidence is wujub, that it should be necessary, right? Like he says, like Sheikh Kamaluddin, meaning Ibn al-Humam, has mentioned this, then it's not appropriate to turn away from the diraya, meaning the dalil, the evidence, especially when there is a transmission that goes in accordance to that, meaning Imam Sahib also mentioned it to be wajib. So because there's two opinions, one sunnah, the other one's mentioned as wajib, we will give preference to the wujub opinion, saying that this is wajib because the diraya, meaning the dalil, the evidence supports this. So this is how to give preponderance. That's obvious that we will give preference to the opinion that is supported through evidence. Right, coming on to the next parts now. So number 7 now he mentions, right, that if there is a transmission, if there's two different opinions or multiple opinions mentioned, and one of them, then even if it's a weak opinion, makes the comment that a person has made, that Muslim has made, that would not deem him to be kafir anymore. So we will go with that opinion, so that it doesn't deem the Muslim a kafir. So he says, because obviously he mentions from Bahr, he quotes from Bahr here, from the chapter of a Babul Murtad, the chapter of apostate, he transmits from Fatawa as-Sughra of Umar bin Abdul Aziz ibn Maza. Ibn Maza, famously 536 years, he says that the kufr is something grave, something meaning it's too grave. So I will not deem a mu'min a kafir until I find a transmission that will not make him a kafir. So this is the mizaj, this is the mentality of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi as well, that is transmitted all the way up to him. So this is something that we will do. We will try to keep the Muslim a believer. And even if it be to the extent that's mentioned in Raddul Muhtar, volume 4, page 230, he mentions to the extent that even if it's the transmission of another school, the madhab of somebody else, even out of the 4 schools, we'll go with that too. The only time we obviously will not be able to do, like it mentions in Bazzaziyah, that unless that person who said what they're saying clearly mentioned to us that they do intend kufr, okay, then obviously doing any ta'wil, interpreting their wording into some other, some sort of interpretation, then that won't benefit in any way when they've clearly mentioned they meant kufr. But obviously we're not going to promote or prompt that person to say that, right? The idea is that a person's mentioned something, now somebody's asking us that this person said this, are they kafir? So we will see whether this statement that this person has made can be interpreted in any way, and we'll try to interpret it to not make that person a kafir if there's a possibility to do so. So that's what we're talking about here. Then number 8 is he mentions that if there is an opinion which has been retracted from, and we've established that the mujtahid is no longer holding this opinion, then it would be necessary to go with the opinion that they retracted to, the one that they are now on, and you can no longer practice or give fatwa on the former ruling which he has retracted from, because that is in essence like as though it's a abrogated ruling, just like in Shari'a, if there was a abrogated ruling completely, in the same way here the faqih, the mujtahid, he has completely gone away from this opinion, so it now as though it is abrogated. So that is, he's quoted from various scholars to try to establish that. Bahar mentions this. He's quoting from Tawshih, at-Tawshih, which is a Sharh al-Hidayah, Sharh of Hidayah of Allama Ghaznawi, Umar bin Ishaq al-Ghaznawi al-Hindi. He is 773. So he quotes this from him, saying that the opinion which the mujtahid turned away from is not permissible to take that opinion. This is also mentioned from Sharh al-Tahrir, the same concept he mentions. Now, moving on, he then says, number 9, the last qaida, the last one he shares with us, being that the general rule is that the matan is given preference first, then the shuruh, meaning the commentaries, and then the fatawa. So this is general order, and the reason being is that this is when we're talking about there's no preponderance on any of the opinions. So there's no preponderance on the opinion that's mentioned in the matan. There's an opinion mentioned in the sharh. There's also an opinion mentioned in a fatwa somewhere, and there's no clear preponderance mentioned for any of them. Then the weight that will be given, most weight will be on the matan, because the matan generally is the zahirul riwayat, generally speaking. So that's the reason why it has the most weight when it comes to ruling, because what's mentioned in the matan, we call it a tarjih iltizami, meaning we're going to study this later a bit more as well, but we call this a implicit preponderance. So it's not an explicit preponderance, but it's implicitly preponderated because of it being in the primer. Because their purpose was, like I said, was to write the mufta bihi opinion. Generally, they won't write that this is the fatwa everywhere. Their purpose was simply to write the ruling. In this mas'ala, this is the ruling. In this mas'ala, this is the ruling. And they just wanted to mention what the ruling is rather than mentioning ikhtilafat, mentioning differences of opinion. That wasn't their purpose when they were writing the primers. So that's what is the general concept here. So I've already explained why this is the case. He quotes this from various scholars, Anfa'ul Wasail, Khairiyya, and he gives support to what he is saying over here. So then he quotes lastly from one of the shurrah of Hidayah, Qadi al-Qudat Shamsuddin al-Hariri, his 728, that Sadruddin Sulaiman ibn Wahb, who's 677, he says that these fatawa that I mentioned, they are the chosen opinions of some of the mashayikh, and you can't contradict them. You can't contradict using them. You can't contradict the books of the madhab. So what's mentioned in the books of the madhab, you can't contradict them using these fatawa. Okay, because unless obviously, like I said, there is preponderance somewhere explicitly mentioning why certain things were preponderated. So this is what he mentions here. Now, because he's talking about the mutun here, he's talking about the primers, then he just lastly goes into saying which are the primers? What are we talking about when we're saying mutun? So then he says the mutun are these books. So he lists them. Okay, I'm just going to mention it in the order that he says it in. I will give you death dates and things, so then you can obviously change the order, because he mentions it in an order which obviously is not in accordance to which one came first. So you can do that in yourself. So he first says the bidayah. Obviously, the bidayah is an amalgamation of the Quduri and the Jami' al-Saghir. That's what it is an amalgamation of, and we know this is very famously of Sahibul Hidayah, who did the sharh of the bidayah himself afterwards. So Al-Alama Marghinani 593. So his is the bidayah there, which he mentions first. Then he mentioned the Mukhtasar al-Quduri, famously of Abu Hussein Ahmad al-Quduri, 428 death date. So everyone knows what the Quduri is. Then he mentions the Mukhtar. So this is Mukhtarul. This is the Sharh, okay, of Al-Ikhtiyar basically. No, Al-Ikhtiyar, sorry. Al-Ikhtiyar is the Sharh of Al-Mukhtar. It's called Al-Mukhtar lil-Fatwa. Al-Mukhtar lil-Fatwa, yes, that's what it's called. He wrote the Matan, the Mukhtar. This is of Mawsali, okay, Abdullah bin Mahmud al-Mawsali. His 683 death date, 683. He wrote the Mukhtar, the Matan, and then he did the Sharh of it, Al-Ikhtiyar. لتعليل المختار it's called, isn't it? So that's the next matan that he mentions, the Mukhtar. Then he mentions the Nuqaya. So the Nuqaya is a khulasa of the Wiqaya. Yes. So the Nuqaya he mentions first, which is a summary of the Wiqaya. This is why it's a little bit confusing sometimes, because he mentions the later ones. The later ones actually, some of them are former. But anyway, if you write it in order, it'll become easy for you to understand what I'm saying. So the Nuqaya, this is of Sadr al-Shari'a al-Asghar. Sadr al-Shari'a, because there's a few Sadr al-Shari'a. So this is Sadr al-Shari'a Mahbubi. Sadr al-Shari'a, he's known as the Asghar as well. He is Ubaidullah bin Mas'ud. Okay, 745 is his death date. And then after that he mentions the Wiqaya. So the Wiqaya is of Taj al-Shari'a Mahbubi. So he's also Mahbubi. He was the grandfather of the Sadr al-Shari'a Mahbubi. So the one who we mentioned just now, the Ubaidullah. So the grandfather is Wiqaya basically, and Wiqaya's khulasa, the summary, was written by the grandson, which then was the Nuqaya. Okay, so the Wiqaya is a famous text of Taj al-Shari'a, Mahmud bin Ahmad Mahbubi basically. You may find his name Mahmud bin Ahmad Sadr al-Shari'a, but that's the title of Sadr al-Shari'a al-Akbar basically. Mahmud's title was Taj al-Shari'a Mahbubi, and he is 673 death date, and he wrote the Wiqaya. Then you have the Kanz, which is the primer, the matan of Bahr al-Ra'iq, the famous Kanz al-Daqa'iq, and that's obviously written by famous scholar Abu al-Barakat al-Nasafi, Abdullah bin Ahmad al-Nasafi. 710 is his death date. So Kanz is the next matan he mentioned. Then he mentions the Multaqa al-Abhur. The Multaqa, he says, which is written by Halabi, Ibrahim bin Muhammad al-Halabi. This is 956. A bit later we're talking now, yes? That's the ones he mentions. What he misses out here is another matan, Tuhfatul Fuqaha, of Alauddin Muhammad bin Ahmad al-Samarqandi, 539, which is the primer of Bada'i'. So Bada'i' al-Sana'i', famous kitab of ours, and the sharh, it's the sharh of Tuhfatul Fuqaha. So that's one that is missed out. Now he does mention, these are the ones he says which are Mutun al-Mu'tabara. These matans, these primers, are on their own, they are reliable. They're relied upon because the authors, they transmitted the Zahirul Riwaya in there, the manifest transmission in there. Though they may not all be Mufta Bihi, they may not be the fatwa in our madhab, but they will be relied upon, what's written in there. And unlike, he says, other mutun like the Ghurarul Ahkam, which many shuruhat have been written of, like Durarul Ahukam is a sharh of it, which is reliable. The sharh is, but the Ghurarul Ahkam, the matan itself, Mullah Khusru is not. Mullah Khusru is 885. Likewise, you have the matan of Tanwirul Absar of Alamatu Murtashi, and the Durrul Mukhtar as well of Allama Haskafi. These are mutun, but they're not mutun which can on their own be relied upon. You need the sharh with it. So the Raddul Mukhtar is obviously very reliable, but the matan on its own will not be. Does that make sense, everybody? Hopefully this all will make sense. So he's discussed the different mutun that are mu'tabar, but obviously mutun, there are many, but on their own, these mutun that he discussed were mu'tabar, were relied upon. I've given you some examples of the opposite where there were mutun, the primers which were not relied upon, and the reasons briefly as to why they weren't. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Now, just to summarize what we've done today, we went through the 9 rules, or 9 of the rules, I would say, for the giving preference to a certain opinion. First one he mentioned was that in ibadat we go with Imam Abu Hanifa. Number 2, in qada we go with Imam Abu Yusuf. Number 3, in Dhawil Arham inheritance we go with Imam Muhammad rahimullah. Then istihsan over qiyas, number 4. And then Zahir al-Riwayah over anything which is not Zahir al-Riwayah. Then we don't turn away from any dalil evidence when there is an opinion that would support that. Number 6. Number 7, if there is a way to, if there's an opinion basically that will keep a person Muslim for a certain statement they made, we will keep that person Muslim, we'll give fatwa on that weaker opinion, even if it be. Number 8, anything that mujtahid has turned away from, then that is in essence mansukh, that is in essence something which can't be relied upon. Number 8. Number 9, so obviously that means, number 8 means that then the opposing opinion, which he has not turned away from, will be the one that will be given preference and preponderance to. That's the purpose of number 8. Number 9 is that generally what's mentioned in the mutun will be given preference, then that which mentioned in the shuruh, and then that which is mentioned in the fatawa. So we went through detail of each one, explaining each one why, and trying to give an example for most of them. And lastly, he mentioned that there are certain mutun, which, because we said lastly the mutun will give preference, so this is mutun that are there, which were generally written to preserve the Zahir al-Riwayah, the actual, so some of them obviously will be muftabihi, some of them will generally be, not always be. So that's something that you have to look at the sharh of that particular matan for. But you can see that generally speaking, those mutun were relied upon. So he mentioned the Bidayah, the Mukhtasar al-Quduri, the Mukhtar lil-Fatwa, then the Nuqaya, the Wiqaya, the Kanz al-Daqa'iq, the Multaqa al-Abhur. These were the ones he mentioned. I added to this list Tuhfat al-Fuqaha as well, so you can add to that list. And then we also understood that there are other mutun that people do know about, especially like, for example, the Dur Mukhtar is a famous one, but that is on itself, it can't be relied upon. We've covered this before because it's too brief, and it's difficult for somebody to understand on its own. You need the sharh for it.